Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. We want to give everyone time to settle in and get comfortable. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Hollenbeck. I'm the co-owner of Women and Children First in Chicago. And I want to welcome all of you to this celebration of the release of We've Got This, Essays by Disabled Parents. This collection is edited by Eliza Hull, who is joining us this evening. Before we get started, I want to offer an access invitation. We invite you to make yourselves comfortable in your space, and this event will be recorded, and we'll make that recording available after the event for those who cannot join us tonight. For accessibility, we have provided part captioning and ASL interpretation. If you are using ASL, we'll keep the interpreters spotlighted throughout the program. To make sure you can see them, put your Zoom window into the gallery view. We'll also be providing visual descriptions of ourselves throughout the program. To kick things off, I'm Sarah. I'm a white woman with curly brown hair that reaches my shoulders. I'm wearing a blue sleeveless jumpsuit, and I have facial paralysis, which means that my mouth is always a little bit open, my eyes are always a little bit closed, and other things like that. I'm so delighted to have all of you here. I also want to offer a land rights acknowledgement. Though we are currently gathered together in a virtual space, Women and Children First and Access Living, our co-sponsor, are located on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and the Ojibwa Nation, as well as other tribal nations. In the spirit of healing, we acknowledge the original people of the Chicagoland area, and we want to name that Chicago has one of the largest urban Native American communities in the United States. Native people are part of Chicago's past, present, and future. And as a community invested in social justice, we understand that fighting for disability justice requires dismantling settler colonialism, white supremacy, and ableism. In terms of tonight's structure, following this introduction, Beth Benson is going to give a short description of our partner for the event, Access Living. Then I'll come back on to celebrate our author and editor. Our two speakers will be in conversation, and following their discussion, there's a little time for Q&A. If you have a question, please put your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll read those to the author and editor. Now I'll pass things off to Beth for an introduction about the amazing folks at Access Living.
Hi, everyone. My name is Beth Benson. I'm the administrative assistant at the Arts and Culture Project of Access Living. By way of a visual description, I'm a white, gender fluid person with short brown hair and thick rimmed pink and blue glasses. And I'm sitting in front of a blurred out background, but you can see some peach on the wall behind me. Access Living is very proud to partner with Women and Children First to present a series of book events highlighting the work of disabled writers. Access Living is a cross-disability organization focused on services and advocacy for people with disabilities, led by people with disabilities. The Arts and Culture Project at Access Living promotes innovative art, supports new and established artists with disabilities, develops new audiences, and increases public access to disability arts and culture. I'd like to take a moment to thank our other sponsors who make events like this possible. So this event is brought to you by Bodies of Work, a network of disability culture, and Bodies of Work is a part of the Department of Disability and Human Development within the College of Applied Health Sciences at the University of Illinois, Chicago. This event is also supported by the Disability Cultural Activism Lab, a teaching lab housed under the Department of Art Therapy and Counseling at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. This program is partially supported by grants from the Illinois Arts Council Agency, Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. So I'm going to pass things back to Sarah so she can introduce our wonderful speakers for this evening.
Thank you so much, Beth, and everyone at Access Living. If you're in Chicago, I strongly encourage you to check out Access Living and the programs and events they have coming up. And now I have the great honor of introducing this incredible anthology, We've Got This, Essays by Disabled Parents. As the publisher of this book knows, when I received my copy of this book, I burst into tears. I'm the mother of a 2-year-old, and I felt so at sea when I became a mother because I didn't know any other disabled parents. And this book, reading this book has like given me many life rafts, little buoys that I am grabbing onto and that are helping me navigate a lot of difficult situations. So I am so grateful for this collection, and just it's one of those books that I'm so happy it exists. So I'm honored to welcome one of the authors in the collection, Daniela Daniela is a disability advocate and wheelchair user and a new mom to twins. She works full-time in social media and advertising within the wheelchair industry. She holds a master's in English literature with a focus on disability studies. As an advocate, her work centers on elevating voices of disabled parents, and she is the subject and producer of Danny's Twins, an upcoming documentary about pregnancy and motherhood as a quadriplegic during the pandemic. A dual citizen of the United States and Italy, she now lives in rural Virginia with her husband, kids, and trusty service dog. Eliza Hull, the editor, is a musical artist, writer, journalist, and disability advocate based in Victoria, Australia. Her podcast is a series on parenting with a disability. We've Got This was one of the Radio National and ABC Life's most successful series of all time. Please join me in welcoming Danny Zay and Eliza Hull.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So I'm just going to do a quick visual description. So I am a white woman, and I'm wearing a black and white striped top today with silver hooped earrings with my hair in a bun. I've got brown hair, and behind me is some white cupboards. So yes, as Sarah just introduced me. My name is Eliza Hull, and I live in a regional town called Castlemaine, which is near Melbourne, about an hour and a half from Melbourne in Victoria, Australia. And the way that we're going to run this, I was just going to speak just a little bit about my experience as a disabled parent and share, I guess, why I wanted to create this anthology. And then I will be speaking to Danny about her experiences being part of the book and her experiences as a disabled parent. So thank you so much for joining us. So I guess the reason that I wanted to create this anthology was really based on my own personal experience. And for a long time, I have a physical disability, which is called Charcot-Marie-Tooth. I guess the way that it affects me is that I walk, very differently, and I fall over a lot. And I have very low muscle tone in my hands and my legs. It affects me in many different ways. But for a long time, I guess I had a lot of internalized ableism, and that was because I didn't have very much representation growing up in regional Australia. And my parents really were always wanting to fix my disability. So I had lots of medical appointments, and was a wheelchair user on and off throughout school. And it was just really in that kind of fix it mentality growing up. And so I guess when that happens, you start to believe that that's what you ought to be, that you ought to be somebody that should be fixed. And, I was very medicalized growing up. When I decided to become a parent, I went to my neurologist, who I'd been seeing since I was a child, and told him that I wanted to start a family. And I was really excited. I was lucky in that my parents always assumed that I should and could be a parent. I have a 50% chance of passing on my disability. And I went to my neurologist and said that I was wanting to start a family, and he told me that I shouldn't be a parent and that I couldn't manage. He thought that I would fall over, or that I wouldn't be able to look after my child. And I remember in that moment feeling a lot of shame and vulnerability. And I think, when you feel medicalized, you end up trusting medical professionals. And so I went back to my partner and said that I'd been told that I shouldn't be a parent, and that maybe that's the truth. Maybe I shouldn't be. And luckily, he was very supportive and said, no, that's not, like, let's do it. And if I had have listened to my neurologist, I wouldn't have my family, and I wouldn't have the 2 children that I have. And so when I decided that I wanted to start a family, I then went on the internet and tried to build a community of other disabled parents, but also to find other stories. I was really searching for a resource, really, to know what it was going to be like to be a disabled parent, to find, ways to adapt. And I couldn't find anything out there. This was, say, 9 years ago now. And I looked online, and often it was portrayed that it would be a burden for a child to have a parent with a disability. And so that was when I decided to create the audio series, which was also written articles with the ABC broadcast here. And I was really surprised by the reaction that I got. A lot of people said that they actually had held on to views that disabled people shouldn't be a parent, especially parents with intellectual disability. And I think that really fired me up and made me realize how much needs to change, and how we still today need to shift attitudes. And so after that series went really well, I decided that I wanted to make it into a book. And so it became a book here in Australia, and then now it's a book overseas, obviously in America, Canada, and England, and also other countries like Korea, which is exciting as well. And the process was that I had some parents write their stories, and some parents I interviewed. And that was for many reasons. Some of those reasons were due to accessibility. I wanted to make it accessible for people. And so it was, that you could be interviewed or write your own story. I guess I wanted to say what I learned through making this book is that a lot of disabled parents face the same discrimination from medical professionals, often ableist attitudes, often told that they shouldn't be a parent, often judged, often it was inaccessible. So medical spaces, for instance, blind parents have said that they weren't given a tour around the hospital and didn't know, even where to be able to get a coffee or a cup of tea. Often parents were set up to fail. There's a story of 2 parents with intellectual disability who were very judged and discriminated against, and ultimately set up to fail, and had to go through the court process to be able to have their child in their care. And it was quite distressing, very distressing actually, for both parents and for the child. And now, they're a thriving, happy family that should never have gone through that court process. So I think that I've noticed that a lot of this discrimination is for parents with intellectual disability, and still today more than 60% of parents have their children taken from them, and I think a lot of people don't realize that. I guess the other things I wanted to say is that for me, especially for, from my experience, but also the other parents within this book, is that really the greatest obstacles are out in society. And when we go out in the world is when often we, are discriminated against or judged or face negative attitudes. And within the home, I think what I have realized is, as disabled people, like for me anyway, growing up, I've always had to navigate an inaccessible world and figure out how I'm going to get into a building because I can't get upstairs. And, that enabled me to be great at problem solving, be really flexible, adaptable, think out of the box, really, ultimately. And that enabled me to do that when I became a parent. So, navigating, how do I bath my child? Well, using different methods. How did I, get my child up and down? All those kind of things. I've had to do things really differently, but in a way that is, I guess, more creative and shows my skill of being adaptable and being great at problem solving. So I think that in the end, the issues and discrimination that I've ever faced has always been outside the home. And I think this book really shows how incredible we are as disabled parents, and that we shouldn't have to face this judgment and discrimination when deciding to be a parent or when we're out in society. So I'm really proud of this book, and I think it's the representation that I certainly needed when I was deciding to be a parent. And also even just in those early years, I wish that this book existed just to be able to feel less alone in my decision to be a disabled parent, because it has been hard to find community locally. Anyway, I've found it online, which has been wonderful. But yeah, I just wish this book had have existed. So I'm very, very proud of it. But I wanted to introduce Danny now, and then ask Danny some questions about being part of the book. How are you?
Hi everyone. I'll give a quick visual description myself. So I am a white woman, brunette, brown eyes, brown, actually quite voluminous hair today. It's shoulder length, and my background is blurred.
Great. Well, Danny, I guess I wanted to know what it was like contributing to this book, especially when it's about something that's, quite personal, your family, your relationship. Yeah, is that hard to kind of share that story?
Yeah, Eliza, it is hard to be public about my parenting with a disability kind of story, right? I have actually been very public with it. I made, I've been in an entire documentary about my journey as a quadriplegic woman who had twins during the pandemic. I kind of had like this very sensational story, and it was very public, and it's hard because I think as people with disabilities, we really feel like we're under a magnifying glass. Like I feel like we're scrutinized because the knee-jerk reaction is to look at us and think incompetence. And so I think, just becoming transparent and being transparent with my story, it's hard. It feels scary. It feels like you'll be judged or misunderstood. It feels like maybe you can't be completely transparent all the time. Maybe you can't express how hard of a time you're having, because at that moment that you do admit that, somebody's going to say, aha, I knew it. I knew she couldn't do this. This isn't right, So yeah, it's hard, but at the same time, it's so rewarding to be able to contribute to this anthology, because I know it's so needed and it's going to go a long way and impact people tremendously. And I would have loved to have this book before I had my girls, but I'm glad to have it now, and it's impacting me now. Every story I read is very moving and very encouraging. And I'm in the trenches right now with my 3-year-old girls. So this is great.
Yeah, because we've got exactly the same age child. I remember that when like COVID, during COVID,
Yeah.
we both had our children. I guess I wondered, you do speak about this in the book, but what your experiences was like, with medical professionals when you were wanting to have a child and going through the pregnancy.
Yeah, so I actually had heard all kinds of nightmare horror stories from women with disabilities about their experiences with OBGYNs and reproductive health care, but I actually had a fantastic experience. So, and I think it's great because when I tell my story, people can use it as an example of what the experience should be like. I went to UVA, University of Virginia. They have a maternal fetal medicine clinic, so basically high risk doctors. I wasn't actually high risk because of the quadriplegia. I was high risk because I was having multiples. But the reason I chose that doctor to begin with, before I knew I was having multiples, was because my feeling was that they might have a better bedside manner and more knowledge, because they deal with mothers with disabilities and babies with disabilities, fetuses with disabilities day to day. And my hunch ended up being right. And I think one of my main doctors, Dr. Fuller, I'm pretty sure he had like a relative with a disability, because you meet those people and they're so at ease and so comfortable, and they just know how to talk to you in regards to your disability. And I think it turned out that he did. He had someone in his family close to him with a disability. And you know what he told me? He said, your disability prepared you for this. That's what he said when we found out that I was having multiples. And I was like, this is the best doctor ever. And this is almost unheard of, right? But that should be the norm.
Yeah, I agree with what he was saying. And you're right, it should be the norm. It's funny that you notice that you notice that you're actually treated right all of a sudden, and it's like, okay, that should just be the norm, shouldn't it? I wondered, what was it like when you first discovered that you were having twins, and was that daunting? I guess, exaggerated by the fact that you have a disability.
Yeah, I mean, it took a lot for me to come to the conclusion that I should have children at all. Like, I always wanted children, but there was a moment in time where I wasn't sure if it would be the right thing for me, because of how many challenges I deal with day to day, and because of internalized ableism, where I was telling myself this lie, actually, that I couldn't take care of myself. I kept saying in my head, how am I going to take care of a child if I can't take care of myself? Which is just ridiculous, because I take care of myself every day. So I don't know, like, where this message came from that came into my brain that made absolutely no sense. Like, hello, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm thriving. Of course I'm taking care of myself. So I think I had to kind of work through that. And once I worked through that and we decided to make a baby, I got pregnant right away, luckily. And I will tell you though, before that moment, I planned meticulously all of the kind of like ideas I had around adaptations. My hands are paralyzed as well, so I have paralysis from my shoulders down. I do have some movement in my arms, as you can see. I'm waving my arms around all over the place, but I don't have fine motor control in my fingers, and my arms are kind of weak. And of course I can't walk, I use a wheelchair. So I was really planning meticulously. So when I found out that there were two, I was just like, oh shit. So much for all that. Like, I guess I'm just gonna wing it.
Yeah. It would
Yeah,
be a bit like,
it just all went out the window.
yeah. Did you feel represented? Like, did you have, anyone that you could speak to that also had a disability or also had twins?
In the public space, absolutely not. No representation in the public eye. Meaning that most people around me had no idea what I was going through, what I needed, or anything like that. I did have some online communities through private support groups on Facebook and a couple individuals on Instagram who are actually authors in this anthology, who I was able to connect with. Those individuals and those groups were my lifeline while I was pregnant, especially, and when I was preparing, because I had so many questions that when you go to like the major websites online, like here in the States, we have like, I don't even know what they're called, but like the baby preparation websites that everybody obsesses over during their 9 months of pregnancy, and where you go to get all the info. There is nothing on there curated for people with disabilities. So I would go to my groups or the people I knew online, and I'd ask them, what did you do? How did you do this? I think it really bothered me that there was nothing on television. You see no disabled parents on television again. I think in some reality TV shows, but other than that, like, you don't see characters who are parents and happen to have a disability as well. So
yeah, it's still a problem, isn't it, even today? I'm curious, what are the ways that you have had to be like quite creative in the way you parent and adapt? Are there any kind of tips that you could give others in that space?
yeah, I mean, I would say you can spend all the money in the world on fancy contraptions and adaptations, and honestly, when it comes down to it, there are simple solutions that are right in your face that you don't even notice at first. For example, I started scouring the internet for a baby changing table that I could actually roll under. I'm not a genius, because it took me a while to figure out the dining table. I don't even need to buy anything. I just put the baby on the table on a mat, and that's it.
Yeah, and I've got a friend that has dwarfism that was looking for a change table in as appropriate height, and then she was like, I'm just going to cut some of the legs off, like, so it's a bit lower. Like, you can just
Yes.
make changes yourself.
Yes, exactly. And I think one of the other ones that I talked about in the book was bed sharing. So I think a lot of us here know that in the States, bed sharing is really frowned upon, but there are experts who say that there's safe bed sharing, and there are methods to share beds safely, and that's well researched and documented. And honestly, parents have been doing it since the beginning of time, and it also happened to be the most successful thing for me. I spent way too much money on an accessible crib that I couldn't get to because I can't hop out of bed. I'm paralyzed. It's like an Olympic feat for me to get out of bed.
Yeah.
So it's actually more dangerous for my child to be in a separate room in a crib that I can't, get to easily. So bed sharing for me was a solution that I didn't have to pay for, that made sense for us. How about you?
When-
Actually, I'm curious
Pardon?
now. How about you?
I was just about to say, like, similar. I mean, my first child, I've got two children, I didn't bed share because I thought it was, wrong because I've been told that. And it was actually far more dangerous. The second time was like safe, and I bed shared, and it was accessible and easier. I was less tired, less fatigued, it just was better for everyone. So
Yeah.
I think that there is definitely a safe way to bed share, and it can be a lifesaver.
And I think that's one of the scary things I'm still scared to talk about the fact that I bed share, because sometimes I feel like it's another one of those things that people can use as ammo against you when you're a disabled parent, So
Absolutely. I guess I want to know, we've spoken a bit about how you've adapted in the home, but what about out in the world? Have you faced negative attitudes, or have you faced,
have I faced what?
negative attitudes out in the world when you're out with your children?
No, I haven't yet. And hopefully I never will, but my experiences have been limited because right now when I go out with them, there has to be somebody else there. I need somebody there to assist me. At the moment, I can't take them out independently. I will be able to when they get a little bit older. And I am curious, when I'm alone with them, will I be treated the same way? Now, when I go out with my husband and my mom, people see this wonderful, supported mom with a disability and a supportive family, and that's great. That's acceptable.
Yeah,
I
it's
don't
funny
know what
that.
it's going to be like when, hopefully soon, I take my girls on the train independently to take them to see my mom in DC. I feel like I could do it now, but I'm scared. I'm not scared about what I know I can do. I know I can handle it, and I know I can handle my girls. I'm scared about what other people might say or do.
Yeah, it doesn't
I'm
get
afraid
any
they might call. I
Mm.
don't know. I think worst case scenario, I'm like, are they going to call CPS on me or something? Because I'm very visibly disabled. You can't see all of me in the video, but the way I move around in my wheelchair, the way I move my arms and my hands around, like, I'm very visibly disabled. So, and they're quite young.
What, I guess, when we're talking about others, what do you want, I think, this book to change? Like, what are the attitudes need to shift when it comes to being a disabled parent?
I think for the most part that I personally have had very supportive people, even strangers have been supportive. But at the same time, I've also gotten pretty negative feedback, usually from anonymous people on the internet, right? Trolls saying that it's so selfish of me to be a mom, that it's not fair for my children. I never want anybody to look at me and look at my kids and feel sorry for them, because they're so happy and we all love each other. And I just don't need society to like poison my children and our family with these made up nonsense. So yeah, I think I'd kind of like that view to change, that really extreme view that says that we shouldn't be parents. And the thing is, like, even though we know that not everybody thinks that way, and most of us are more evolved to not think that way, the policies and the laws and some of the systemic barriers in place do not reflect that. Like you
True.
just talked about,
And also
parental custody rights. There's like a couple dozen states in this country where parents with disabilities can be discriminated against in courts, depending on the state. Even though we have the ADA, that's a federal law, but there's state laws that allow for discrimination based on disability alone.
What is it like? I'm curious. In America, in currently in Australia, my friend is trying to foster or potentially adopt a child, and she has a disability, and is just finding it impossible. Is that similar in America?
I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience on this. What I can say is that if you are multiply marginalized, it's going to be a lot harder. So if you have intersectional identities, marginalized identities besides being disabled, you're going to encounter the barriers with that. One of my closest friends, Andy Arias, he's a wheelchair user. He's an actor. He's actually a policy maker. He was a policy maker in DC. And he's gay. He's Latino, and he wants to do just that. And he's encountered a lot of resistance with these agencies. So that's what I know.
Yeah. I hope that this is like, well, I hope that this book reaches disabled parents, but I also hope that it reaches those people as well, that, you know, non-disabled people that need this representation to shift attitudes. I wondered, when your children, I mean, I think you did speak about this briefly in the book. So when did they notice that you had a disability, and what was that like?
They're starting to notice now. So it wasn't like just one day they noticed, but they're starting to notice now. And they're very matter of fact about it. I've just told them mommy uses a wheelchair and mommy has a disability. And so now they very matter of factly go around saying mama has a disability, but they don't like pathologize it, you know, they don't make it anything other than what it is, a neutral fact, right? And I love that. I did, one of my daughters, Georgiana, came home saying some really weird things the other day that she picked up at school, at daycare. She said that the teacher said I was broken. The teacher said, Daddy does everything, and that I'm sick. And I was really, really angry for like a week. But now I'm kind of like, well, there's always going to be signals from the outside world trying to define my disability for me, and I'm always going to have to sort of continue to send that messaging to my girls, you know, the messaging that is authentic to me, at least, you know. I don't see myself as sick or broken, and they don't see me that way either. And I think the approach I'm going to take going forward is every time they go to the next class, I'm probably going to arrange a meeting with the teachers, introduce myself, tell them, hey, if the topic of disability comes up, here's how I'd like you to discuss that with my children. Here are a couple children's literature books that you can read to your class, and feel free to invite me in to talk.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Similar, yeah. It was an interesting experience that I had. Do you call it kindergarten, by the way, in America?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So when my daughter was at kindergarten, we were lining up, and I do speak about this in the book actually. And another child said, you know, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with your mum? And the parent of this child said that I'd been in an accident. And but it was unbelievable, because I had literally just the week before told this parent that I was, you know, disabled, had a disability, had for, you know, since I was 5 years old, explained, you know, about how I do advocacy in the parenting space, and yet she still diverted into she's been in an accident. Instead of saying the word disability, it was like this scary thing. And I think it was interesting, as we were walking into the kinder, my daughter said, "Mum, that's a lie. Like you have a disability." Very matter of fact, as you were saying. Yeah. And I thought, wow, that's, you know, just so, yeah, quite beautiful that she could just turn it around so quickly. And then I, you know, tried to explain how disability is still something that is underrepresented and therefore potentially something that people don't want to say. So it was a good, you know, good, I guess, moment where I could talk to her about that. I just also wanted to put it out there for anyone to ask any questions in the chat. If that's not accessible, you could also pop your camera on if you wanted to ask a question. But I can read those questions out for either myself or Danny in the chat. So I guess that another question while we're waiting for some questions, if people would like to ask them, is, you know, often it is framed, you know, online or in medical spaces as disability as a deficit, or seen as, you know, potentially a problematic or a burden for a child to have a disabled parent. How do you flip that narrative around? And you know, what are the ways that you show the world that actually being a disabled parent is a neutral or positive experience for your children?
You know, I think just our kids existing as themselves is the best teaching moment anyone can ever have when it comes to understanding a parent with a disability, because they see our children thriving. And a lot of our kids are, I've heard from other parents with disabilities, a lot of our kids are very compassionate and sometimes helpful. So, you know, I think just living our lives is the best way to kind of go about and being able to share our stories openly and in public. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the main thing. I'm still kind of figuring it out too, you know. The girls are 3 and
yeah,
I've only had so many interactions since the pandemic in public, so I'm still learning myself.
I think for me, because I've got an older child, so an 8-year-old, I'm definitely seeing it play out in the way that she is with other people. So, you know, for instance, at school, she's just a kind human being. And I think that, you know, comes from the way that I parent, but it also comes from having a disabled parent and speaking about disability in the home and diversity in all of its form. So, yeah, I think that it has brought a lot to her life already.
Yes. And, you know, anytime I have the questions, I know I can come to you, Eliza, or some of the other individuals in this book. I actually ran to Rebekah Taussig a couple weeks ago when the daycare comments from the teacher happened, and I texted her and I was like, oh, I feel so bad, you know, and she was crying and I was crying, and it was just so nice to have somebody who understood, you know. So we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
This book is just a perfect opportunity to prove that.
We've had some questions come in, so I'll read them. So is the book solely from the mum perspective or also from the dad perspective, also, are there stories in which both parents are disabled, or are the stories mostly those of one disabled parent with another non-disabled parent? I guess the answer to that is all of it. So there's some dad perspectives in the book, and also just some mum perspectives, and then there are some parents that are both disabled, and also the opposite. So one parent with a disability and one without. So I tried to make sure there was a real cross-section of different disabilities. There are parents that are deaf in this book as well, and varying disabilities, varying locations, and also making sure that there were parents that identified as queer, and people of color. So it's a big mix of lots of making sure that I did that in I guess as best possible way that I could. It wasn't easy to do that. So that's answering that question. The next one is, when you're out in the community or public spaces with your children, what are the usual features of the built environment that you find the most challenging or frustrating? Would you like to answer that, Danny?
Well, for me as a wheelchair user, it's definitely going to be steps, as well as back alley entrances, to some buildings and things like that. But also playgrounds, by the way. The surfaces of playgrounds, they need to start paying attention to what kind of surface they put down, because some of those surfaces you cannot get on in a wheelchair. I can't get in sand. I can't get in mulch. I can't get on gravel. So that means that I literally can't take my kids to the playground and watch over them and play with them. So that's really frustrating. But besides like environmental barriers, I'm really attitudinal barriers can be very challenging too. Like just even the story about the daycare, and I need to kind of educate the educators about my disability. That's kind of a barrier and a challenge as well.
Yeah, for me, I live in a very old regional town here in Australia, and it means that the footpaths have not been updated for I don't know how long. But one thing that's really, really tricky for me is that it's hard to explain, but there's a big incline from the road up to the footpath, and my toddler, when I'm out and about, he's 3, will run up that, and I can't get to him. There's no way. It's just an incline that I can't get up, and I'm trying to get him to come down to me. He won't come down. I just wish that there was more accessible pathways where you could just be able to move up and to be with your child. And so it can be a little bit daunting. And sometimes I have no other way to get him down unless I say something like, we're going to have an ice cream later. It has happened where I've had to bribe, because otherwise
best parenting
it's got to happen, because otherwise there's roads, and the only way I can get around is if I leave, which I don't want to not be able to be watching him. So ice cream is sometimes the thing that I have to go to. So for me, inaccessible pathways, cobbled streets that are really hard to navigate, steps and stairs into buildings, and sometimes other people. I had a really terrible experience last week where I was just paying for my coffee, and someone wasn't looking where they were going and pushed me over. And I accidentally pushed my 3-year-old as well. We both fell backwards. For a moment, I had that oh my gosh, I'm such a terrible parent. I just pulled my child over. We were all fine and everything. But you do have those moments of just doubt. But then I just realized that it could have happened to anyone, and maybe, but also just that person was just not a nice person. They didn't even check we were okay. They just were very, very rude. So I guess for me, yeah, it's been attitudes and people, questioning whether I'm going to be able to make it up, a certain pathway with a pram, or just questioning my ability. And I find that really tricky. So there are definitely physical barriers, but also the attitudes I faced. I've got another question. As I'm a mother of 2 beautiful children, I have cerebral palsy. I'm curious what you guys do when your kid compares your disability to your partner's ability. How do you encourage the child in that when it really roughs my feathers? Yeah, how do you encourage the child in that moment when it really roughs my feathers?
I literally just talked to a child psychologist about this.
Well, there you go. This is perfect.
So let me give you a brief rundown of what she told me. She said, don't put any of the abilities on a hierarchy. So what you should do is start to talk to a kid about what you can do and what you can't do, very neutrally, right? So for me, Mama can't run, but I can push my wheelchair really fast. Mama can't jump, but I'm really good at cooking. I can cook. Mama doesn't take you to school, but I read you books at night, that kind of thing. And then we talk about Rudy, my husband. Rudy takes you to school every day, but does he cook fabulous, delicious bolognese? No, no, I'm kidding. But like I said, like, don't put it on the hierarchy, just very neutral, like talk about everybody's, what they can and can't do. And then also talk about what the kids can and can't do, what they can do now, and what they can't do right now, what they'll be able to do later.
Yeah, I love that. I actually feel like I've done that in the past, and it does. Yeah, it's great. That's a good idea. I like that advice. Hopefully that answered your question, Bree. All right. Well, we might have time for like one more question, or what do you think, Sarah?
Oh, I'm just so enjoying the conversation. I kind of got lost in it. We definitely have time for one more question if anyone wants to pop another question in the chat.
Could I ask a question for Eliza?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or even you, Sarah, because you're mom as well. I'm just curious what traveling looks like.
Well, I just did a big bit of traveling. I went to England, and I'm a singer as well. So I did like a big tour with another disabled artist. And yeah, like that was
traveling with kids.
Yeah, traveling with kids. Yeah, it's tricky, but I guess I had my partner with me. So he was able to take some of that physical load. For me, I just feel like I still struggle with airport staff. I don't know if you've faced this, and just air travel in general. So it just, to me, it still doesn't feel accessible and inclusive at all. I feel, yeah, it's not a great experience. But in saying that, I don't know, I felt like we did all right in England, actually, as a family. And maybe that was because I wasn't working as well. So I just felt like, I think that I do speak about this in the book, and that sometimes the greatest quality of being a disabled parent is kind of like leaning into being to slow parenting, if that makes sense. So like, for instance, if my son and I ever go out and about, like, we notice things because I moved it, differently and a bit more slow. So we smell the flowers and we look at the birds. And so that was something we really lent into when we were traveling, is just trying to make sure that we were just like taking it easy and looking after ourselves. And it was lucky that I wasn't working at the time, so that enabled that. So it was, it was great. But in saying that, other countries like England are tricky at times as well, like a bit more inaccessible in spaces, but also more accessible in others. So it was interesting to navigate that. What about you, Danny?
It's pretty daunting just because like for me, my home is like my accessible, like safe haven. Everything is set up here so that I can function the way that I want to function. And stepping out of this environment anytime is really hard for me. But I also would like to kind of learn more how to like just kind of like just, you know, the slow parenting thing, like maybe just really lean into that in the moments where I know I don't have the access that I wish I had and it frustrates me and it makes me upset. Maybe that's a moment for me to really lean into spending time with my kids, observing things in my environment and appreciating the moment, right? But yeah, it's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, it is. But I know what you mean by that. Yeah, and it's hard to find accessible accommodation as well.
Yeah, it's been so interesting listening to this conversation, and so many of the barriers, the obstacles, the challenges are other human beings and their attitudes. I would say that that's the hardest part for me is people's assumptions about my competency. And my daughter is adopted, and that, well, you obviously aren't her mother because she's, not disabled. And so those assumptions are heightened, I think, when we are out in other spaces that are not our home and our neighborhood where people are familiar with us. So, yeah, so that's one of the huge challenges, but also one of the things where I think it's possible to imagine a future where we can, with books like this, build a better future with all of us connected with one another. Um, Feeling less alone is like just like the first step. Like I think it's also not just like an emotional support, but also resource sharing and is so important in communities like this. So thank you both so much for this book and this conversation. The book is available now in the US and all over. We ship in the United States. I did drop a link to the chat to buy the book, which I encourage all of you to do and tell all your friends as well. This book is not just for disabled parents. I think it's for everyone. Any parting words before we sign off?
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. I think that this book, I want to say, is for everyone. And I think it's been incredible to get those messages like online, on email, or on social media where a disabled person is saying this is what I've needed, this representation. But I have to say that I'm even probably like slightly more excited when a non-disabled person reaches out and says either you have changed my mind, or just that like these stories are really interesting, and some of them are funny, and they're just like great stories, human stories. So I think this book is for everyone, and I hope that it reaches the right spaces.
Mm-hmm. Thank you both so much. I just so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you, Access Living, for co-sponsoring this event. Thank you, all of you in the virtual world, for joining us tonight. As I mentioned before, this event will be recorded, so don't worry if you know someone who missed it. They can watch it on Women and Children First YouTube channel anytime, forever. So. Beth, did you want to say anything before we sign off?
Just to Eliza and Danny, thank you so much for being here. And as a non-parent, I really loved the anthology, and my copy is full of annotations and just reversing that idea that people who receive care cannot also be givers of care, and those things can exist together, was just really beautiful and very impactful to me. So thank you so much for your role in creating this beautiful thing.
Yeah. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Eliza. Thank you, Danny. And thank you, Eliza, for tuning in 17 hours ahead of us in Australia. That's a huge feat all in itself. All right. Have a beautiful night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Bye.
Bye.